Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, your Archbishop of Banterbury, and your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am robcasting at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community from the Robservatory. And this is Robservations, the show about something. Robservations, episode number 379. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, here it's Wednesday, and if you're a Mickey Mouse Club fan, you know Wednesday is surprise day, and anything can happen, and it usually does. More on that in a minute, because something truly extraordinary happened yesterday, which I'll get to in a while. First, I am not beyond criticism. And when you go on the internet, you're going to get criticized. And when you mouth off for hours on end on a daily basis on not just your own show, but other shows like John Campy's show, you open yourself up to criticism. And anybody, I have no problem with that, by the way. I have no problem being criticized. And one of the things that you learn when you make films, and one of the things that I stand behind as an independent filmmaker, is movies are made for an audience. The very act of making a film presupposes you're making it so others can watch it. And that means that one of the obligations I think any filmmaker has is to make sure that audiences, that your film can be consumed by audiences. So I think it's really important that as you are making films, and at the independent level, it's much easier because if you're in control of it, you can show it to people, you can get their feedback, and you can hone it into hopefully the best version of itself. Now, one of the things that I've always told people about criticism when you're showing someone a film, there's a lot of criticism that the first thing is when you show somebody a movie and you ask their opinion, especially if you're in the stage where you're still editing it, the first impulse that you're going to have is to fight back. When somebody says something that's critical, it might be highly critical, it might be just an observation, you always want to step in and explain yourself. And my answer to that is don't. When you show something to somebody, don't defend. When somebody's being critical of it, just listen. And if 4 or 5 people, if there's a consensus and you're getting the same note from multiple people that you respect, you should address that issue. But you never step in and try and tell them what you were going for. If they're not getting it, the fault is yours. The fault isn't theirs. But when you open yourself up to criticism, it's better just to listen and not defend. And I've always said that to filmmakers, and I believe that. I honestly believe that, because the work is the defense. And if there's something in the work that isn't coming through, and you actually have people that you can trust to talk to or to show them your material and trust them to give you honest feedback, I think that's a very good thing. One of the things that I have learned is a lot of the time when people give you things for feedback, they don't really want your feedback. They want affirmation. Now, that's a different thing. And you run into, it can be a very difficult situation. But when you make films, you show them to people and you know you're getting feedback, and that's different. I mean, you can get anybody to sit down and watch a movie, especially if you put it in a screening room and make it a thing, make it an event. People will come, and you have to trust people, the people that you invite, that they're going to give you the kind of feedback you want. I recently attended a screening of a friend of mine, Darren Scott and Rusty Cundiff, have made another in their series of Tales from the Hood films, Tales from the Hood 3. And they invited a group of friends that they trust, and we watched a version of it. It's in the middle of post-production for notes. And that's always a smart thing to do, especially I think it's more important if you're doing things such as comedic movies. It's really important to put it in front of an audience. You don't tell them anything. You just let the movie play, because a movie, you should be able to grab your audience, and then they should laugh at your jokes, hopefully. And if they don't, you can feel it, man. You can feel it. Now, that said, I read criticism of mine. I read all the comments people post on my YouTube, on my YouTube comments, this underneath the videos, and usually I just give a heart. I don't. Sometimes I'll engage. I'll write something, but for the most part, I just try to acknowledge. And for most all comments, I usually give a heart, saying I like this, and it's my way of saying I read this and thank you for commenting. But sometimes, like the other day when I read BL Alley's comment, I'll read comments aloud on the show, or I will respond to certain criticism if I think it's worth responding to. And today, ladies and gentlemen, is one of those days. There was a lot of criticism on yesterday's show. Criticism of me and criticism of my subject matter, which is fine. I think it's great. That's how we learn. That's how... Hey, wait a minute. You know what I didn't learn from? I don't think I turned on my... I didn't turn on my lights. I forgot to turn on my lights, my disco lights. I want to get my groove on. So I wanted to read a comment that I thought was particularly interesting to me. And now I'm not saying this, I'm going to read this. I don't expect people to jump in and defend me. That's not what I'm looking for. Because I guess if you're watching this show, I just assume you like the show. So that's enough. People write letters, they support with super chats and tips. And the deluge of letters has been amazing. And I'm buried underneath letters. Keep writing. I'm going to work my way through them. And I really, really appreciate it. But sometimes I find it very interesting when people write criticism. So this is something that came in yesterday. I Spy Ally Max wrote this 10 hours ago. So what has happened to Rob? He used to be a happy and positive oasis in the fan community. When did he become a part of the fandom menace? He looks totally unhappy and frustrated and miserable in a Wizard of Oz sort of a way. Turning the cranks behind the curtain, trying to maintain the facade, he is still the same open-minded person. I guess it was all a facade. This reminds me of Obama. I still really like Obama, but it eventually became clear this was not going to be the guy I thought he was. I thought he was going to be able to reach across the aisle and unite the parties in common purpose again. My only gripe about Obama before he was elected, that he was too beholden to the Democrats. I remember thinking that about Rob. He's amazing. He's great. So why is he maintaining these ties to these channel runners who don't represent anything he stands for? I guess it's because, as hard as he pretends to be the bridge, his heart is on the other side. Or worse, he's been persuaded by what Mecha Random told me. I don't do positive stories. You don't get views and subs from positivity. I couldn't believe I was seeing him do Mecha Random gestures, heavy breathing, and seething. Wow, I never thought I would see the day. There really are no real-life heroes. I am a little sad. So that was posted on my chat yesterday. And I felt that was worth responding to for a number of reasons. First of all, a lot of people have asked me, why have I been on shows with people that might not have my same approach or might be apparently diametrically opposed to what I'm doing? And those would be people, those are fandom menace channels. They're self-recognized as fandom menace channels. And why would I talk to those people? And also, really, I never considered myself a real-life hero. I'm just here sharing things that I'm enthusiastic about. And when I am not enthusiastic about something and I feel disappointed by something, I feel I can do that as well. But first of all, I want to say one thing about associating with other YouTube channels and other people that might not espouse the same philosophical... we might not have the same philosophy about a number of things. I have been a science fiction fan my entire life. And there is one thing that you learn very early on. I learned this probably when I was 12, and I started going to conventions, and I started going to events. There are people of all kinds in fandom, of all temperaments, of all kind of social abilities, of levels of intelligence, or whatever. And I learned early on, If I wanted to be a fan, I would have to recognize that there is a cornucopia of different kinds of fans that are different than me. But what we're all sort of, why we're all there, what binds us, what keeps us together, is that we are all ultimately imagination connoisseurs. We are all now part of the Post-Geek Singularity. And at the core of all of it is we love this stuff. We love this stuff. We love Star Wars and Star Trek and Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons and video games and Doctor Who and James Bond and Space 1999 and Super Marionettes and anime and comics, whatever it is. Ultimately, at the base of all of it is we do all love this stuff. We're not railing against it because we hate it all. We still love it, and what we really do is we want it to be good. So I find that everybody on all of these channels, when I have sat down and talked to people that people are like, oh, Rob, why are you talking to these people? Well, those people have always treated me very kindly. They've shown me nothing. People from all different channels, whether it's Midnight's Edge, which was a channel, by the way, I was watching before I even knew who any of them were. And I liked what they were doing. And they have always been very, very nice to me. And there's no reason why I wouldn't appear on their channels. I like what they do. I've never met or talked to the Critical Drinker. I don't know if he's a part of the Fandom Menace, but I really appreciate his take on things. Dave Cullen is somebody else, a YouTuber I watched for a long time before I was ever on YouTube doing my own show. I've really liked his videos. And I tend to watch a lot of things. I would watch Jeremy on Geeks and Gamers before I'd ever met him or was on his show. And of course, a lot of people have been critical of people that I know. I've never met Film Gob. I don't know him, but Film Gob certainly made fun of me openly and directly on the internet. And people I know. But I've watched some of his videos. Actually, I've watched a lot of his videos, and I'm amused by them. And we all sort of exist in the same continuum. And I always think that it's great that we have an ecosystem that allows YouTubers to appear places. I like Doomcock's videos. I find him to be amusing. He's playing a role. It's not like Doomcock is a construct that I find to be amusing and entertaining. And I'm sure if he and I went to a comic book store or went and saw a movie together and went and grabbed a bite and had beers afterwards, we'd probably have a 5-hour-long rollicking conversation, and never once would we get mad at one another. And I find it interesting, I've never met Mecha Random. I've been on live streams with her. She's been delightful to me. She's listened to me. By the way, I dare say she's been absolutely polite and listened to me mouth off and prattle on probably much longer than I probably should have. But this idea, by the way, about this gestures, heavy breathing and seething, when I do that, where I got that from was from the late, great John Schnepp. I love when John Schnepp used to do the fan persona video, or I love it when John Campea does that video, or does that voice, the voice. It cracks me up. So when I do that, I'm not thinking about Mecha Random. I didn't know she did that. I'm thinking more about John Schnepp, because when he would do his thing on Heroes, it never ceased to crack me up. And I think we all know what that is. I mean, whether it's the comic book guy on The Simpsons or something like that. But I find it interesting. Now, I take no pleasure, and let me address something else. I don't get more subscriptions and more clicks when I quote-unquote go negative. As a matter of fact, I gain more subscribers when I diversify my output. I had people come to my channel that saw my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles story about the movie turning 30 years old. There were people that have never come to this channel before, wrote me letters. I get more subscribers when I do diverse things. But I'm not doing necessarily this channel to get clicks or subscribers. I'm doing it because it's fun. And I like the community that we're building. And I would say for 99% of it all I do is get positive feedback. So that's why negative feedback doesn't, I don't sweat it. And I see that look, I just want Star Trek to be good. And I am highly critical of a show that I see that has all the resources that it has, and it bums me out that it's not better. And again, I've said, how many times have I said, that doesn't mean I'm taking your ability away from you or telling you you shouldn't enjoy something. You should absolutely enjoy something. And if you enjoy something and if you love Picard, I want to know why. I don't get a lot of reasons. Some people have sent some compelling reasons about why they enjoy things, but I never really hear great arguments about. I'll get some on Twitter where people, I can see that, I get that, but at least you know where I stand. And I would say that one of the things that I am certainly not. I'm very upfront with everything about my opinions, why I'm doing this channel, my interactions with everyone. I'm doing it because it's fun. I'm doing it because I've spent my life as a fan, and part of being a fan, and one of the things that I enjoy is meeting other fans. That's what I like. And if I do go negative on one particular subject matter, I assure you, it's because I fucking hate Star Trek Picard. And it's because I hate what Star Trek has become for the last 10 years. And it's not to get clicks, and it's not to get more subscribers or anything like that. It's because that's my honest opinion. And I've spent a long time fretting over this, and I take no pleasure in it. I want Star Trek to be good. I didn't like going to see Nemesis and not liking Star Trek Nemesis, even though there was things in it I did like. I thought Star Trek First Contact was sort of a step backwards after what they did with the Borg in the Next Generation series. And I found that most of Picard was half-baked ideas, half-baked B-level science fiction ideas that had been dealt with already in previous Star Trek episodes in much more interesting and thoughtful ways. And it seemed to me like the stewards of Star Trek are currently trying to change it into something else. And I really feel that way. And I'm not doing that to be negative, and I'm not doing that to get clicks or anything like that. I'm doing it because that's how I feel. And, I apologize to anyone who come to this channel and used to love my positivity. I think I am still very positive, and I always try and find things interesting that I think I can talk about in a positive way. And I still would like to think that that's where the channel's going. If people feel that it's not going that way, then I will definitely try and make a course correction back to the way, an overall message of positivity. You're never going to get a message of positivity on me or from me when I discuss Star Trek Discovery or Star Trek Picard. I want to. I'm really hoping Star Trek 2 or Picard Season 2 will be a significant course correction from the first season. But I feel that everyone is being underserved by what's going on with Star Trek, most especially the longtime fan base and people, the current audience. I think that if the show is better, they would be doing rousing numbers. I would love to see Star Trek held in the same high regard that a show like Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul or even Ozark is. That's what I'd love to see. And I'm pulling for everybody. I'm hoping that Terry Matalas, Mark Bernardin, the people they're bringing in might change the second season of Star Trek. And I mean, now there's a debate over at Memory Alpha, which is sort of the go-to if you want to find out any information about Star Trek, whether they're really going to decide whether Picard is dead or not. Can you imagine? The preeminent Star Trek information website on the net is trying to figure out whether they should classify Picard as having died. He did die. The answer is yes, he died. And the fact that it's being debated shows that, wow, we're in crazy times. But I just wanted to address that issue. And perhaps some of you might think he doth protest too much. Maybe I am. But I have no problem, addressing these issues. And, so there you go. Now, for a total change of pace, I found this story interesting because I don't usually cover video game stuff here because I love gaming. I'm just not much of a gamer. You get busy and then years go by and you don't play video games. And I love video games. But this I thought was really interesting because I had heard inklings of it, but I didn't know much about it. So I wanted to share it. Now, this dropped today on This was published. Eric Gardner wrote this today in Hollywood Reporter. Call of Duty wins First Amendment victory over the use of Humvees. Now, everyone knows how I was involved with the Axanar project for a while. I haven't been since 2017, so I'm not involved with Axanar in any way, shape, or form anymore. But obviously, Axanar was sued for copyright violations and a number of other things, and it was a fascinating. I was not personally sued, but I was involved with a project that was sued. The project Impresario was sued, but I wasn't. But I was still a part of it, and it was very interesting. I found I was deposed, and going through the whole, watching it all unfold was very interesting. So in this day and age, working in motion pictures, the idea of copywritten material and what you can and can't use. For instance, if you're here in Los Angeles and you're making a movie, and say you want to point your camera at a building on a street, and you want to have that building in the background, there are some buildings that are actually copywritten. You cannot film a commercial project in front of said building. I think the Flatiron building in New York is one of these. If you film in front of that building, the owners of that building are owed money. Like, you can't just shoot Central Times Square or many different, the Griffith Park Observatory. You can't put the Griffith Park Observatory in your project unless you pay for it. And so I'm always fascinated by how our modern age has been developing. Like, what about ubiquitous products like Coca-Cola or a smiley face? For instance, I'll give you a quick example. As everyone knows, I love Hot Toys, the Hong Kong company Hot Toys. They make the Lamborghini, the Ferrari. They're the Tiffany label of mass-produced action figures. Well, they made a figure of the comedian from Watchmen. And, of course, the comedian wears a smiley face button. Well, the hot toy of the comedian has just an empty yellow button on his uniform, on the action figure. They couldn't put the smiley face unless they had paid for the rights to do so, which they didn't do. So they just put the character out with a yellow button. You could draw a smiley face on there. I haven't yet on mine, but that's kind of the world we live in. So this story fascinated me. I was fascinated by this, and I'd heard something about it, but I hadn't read anything substantial until today. Call of Duty wins First Amendment victory over the use of Humvees. A judge rules that Activision is entitled to summary judgment in a trademark lawsuit brought by the manufacturer of military vehicles. Call of Duty maker Activision has prevailed in a closely watched trademark dispute brought by AM General, the government contractor for Humvees. On Tuesday, a New York federal judge responded favorably to Activision's argument that it had a First Amendment right to depict contemporary warfare in its game by featuring Humvees. If realism is an artistic goal, then the presence in modern warfare games of vehicles employed by actual militaries undoubtedly furthers that goal, writes U.S. District Judge George B. Daniels in granting summary judgment in favor of Activision. The video game publisher fought AM General's claims along with Major League Gaming Corp., a professional esports organization. The dispute was potentially worth tens of millions of dollars, and the discussion attracted intellectual property professors and the Electronic Software Association to weigh in with amicus briefs. One of the reasons why the dispute became such a big deal was its potential to complicate a test established in Rogers v. Grimaldi, a 1989 decision that resulted from a lawsuit brought by the actress Ginger Rogers over the Fellini film Ginger and Fred. The test directs judges to examine whether use of a mark has artistic relevance, and if so, whether the work is explicitly misleading. But in this case, in this Call of Duty case, AM General argued that trademark laws hardly give way to the First Amendment when an infringing work is expressive, and when dealing with famous marks, judges should heed an additional 8-factor test for consumer confusion set forth in Polaroid versus Polar Rad. Polaroid versus Polaroid. That's because AM General told the judge the explicitly misleading prong could be satisfied upon particularly compelling evidence in the likelihood of confusion. That's a lot to take in. Judge Daniels decides to travel down this road, and after coming to the conclusion that the use of Humvees in Call of Duty has some artistic relevance, he ends up with a more surprising finding. The Polaroid factors actually favor Activision. He acknowledges that there's strength in plaintiff's mark, i.e. consumers recognize Humvees, but doesn't see much similarity in how the two sides are using the mark. One is selling vehicles to the military, while the other is creating realistic modern warfare video games. As for proximity of the products, while AM General may license out the rights to depict Humvees in games and toys, the judge isn't impressed because that's not its central purpose as a business. Then there's the evidence of actual confusion. The judge acknowledges an expert's survey that shows some confusion, less than 20%, but says it tips only slightly in AM's favor. One of the more notable Polaroid factors here is good faith, basically an analysis of why Activision decided to adopt Humvees into its game. AM General pointed to documents, emails, and witness testimony, the presence of Humvees decorated with Call of Duty logos at promotional events, and statements in user guides where consumers were allegedly told that Activision either owns or licenses the Humvee IP. And yet, it all fails as Daniels concludes that these three clutches of circumstantial evidence, even if afforded the benefit of all reasonable inferences in plaintiff's favor, do not demonstrate a desire to sow confusion between the two companies' products. And here's what I'll talk a little bit about Axanar after this. Here's the full opinion, and it's on there. You can click on it. To the extent that any of the Polaroid factors are satisfied, such that a modicum of confusion might be present, plaintiff nonetheless has failed to present sufficient evidence to defeat summary judgment, writes the judge, who then takes up whether Activision has offered a persuasive explanation of its use. Here, that persuasive explanation is realism, given Humvee's widespread use by modern militaries. Daniels writes, assuming arguendo, that these Latin terms for legal briefs, that realism is the only artistic interest that Call of Duty games possess, an assumption potentially belied by the presence of narrative campaign modes in all of the challenge games, is also true that realism can have an artistic merit in itself. I thought that's really interesting. I'm gonna put this in the live chat, and so you can read it, because there's interesting links in there, and I think they're interesting. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is, the Axanar lawsuit and what happened with that. Now, as many people know, I only edited Prelude to Axanar, and I was going to direct the Axanar feature film that never got made, nor will it ever get made now because of the lawsuit. But one of the things that triggered the lawsuit was the one scene that I did direct from the Axanar feature, which was called the Vulcan scene, which you can go watch on the Axanar YouTube page. It's called Axanar, the Vulcan scene. And that was a scene that mostly Bill Hunt rewrote actually. It was originally conceived of by Alec Peters and Christian Gossett. And then, which started out in a room, and then we moved it, and then Bill Hunt and I rewrote it, and then I wasn't satisfied with my rewrite, so I gave it to Bill Hunt to work on, and what we shot was sort of an amalgamation. And in that scene, unlike the Prelude to Axanar short film, which was done as a documentary, there'd never been a sort of Band of Brothers Star Trek documentary before, so the Prelude to Axanar short film was not necessarily infringing on copyright, but the important thing is it didn't create confusion in the marketplace. Nobody would ever mistake the Prelude to Axanar short film as being real Star Trek. However, what we were going to do with the Axanar feature film was to bring in a Hollywood sheen to what had traditionally been a fan film space, and also we raised a lot of money to do it. So there was a two-prong issue, but I won't speak to the money issue. I'm only going to speak to the artistic intent issue, because that was what I was directly involved with. I had nothing to do with the management of the money on the Axanar project. I was basically a gun for hire. And what was interesting was, after we did the Vulcan scene, which was shot in a parking lot with a 20 by, which is a 20-foot by 20-foot piece of green screen, we were able to create something by design in one afternoon that Paramount, which is it's part of the lawsuit, felt could create confusion in the marketplace. We had Gary Graham coming back and playing Soval. Our design, the beautiful plates that I work with to create, that were generated and produced by the German company, the Lightworks, under the supervision of the amazing Tobias Richter, who is one of the, I mean, nobody loves Star Trek spaceships and Star Trek special effects more than Tobias Richter does. And it was a joy to work with him. And for 3 minutes, we created a scene. Do I think the Vulcan scene is the end-all, be-all? Not at all. As a matter of fact, I wanted to reshoot that scene because we built a giant green screen after that would have allowed me to put the camera where I wanted to and really shoot the heck out of that scene. But with using dolly track and a 20 by in a parking lot in one day under natural lighting conditions, I thought we did a pretty good job. And if anybody wanted to know what direction I would head in terms of doing something Star Trek related, the Vulcan scene is the only scene that I've ever directed that has Star Trek content. So if you go to Axanar, the Vulcan scene, you can see it. But that's one of the things that happened. Now, in this case, as the judge rightly points out, Activision does not want to sell vehicles to the military. Their business is to make realistic video games. And I particularly I have been playing the Call of Duty games. I have some of them right behind me right here, actually. I love the Call of Duty Modern Warfare franchise, and I thought it was terrific. Now, there's never going to be any confusion in the marketplace that was a GM General, the company that makes Humvees, that is selling Humvees to governments or militaries around the world. There's never going to be confusion between what Activision is doing and what that company that's manufacturing the Humvees is doing. Until Activision decides it wants to get into the market of building vehicles for the world's militaries, they're totally diametrically opposed in terms of what they're trying to do. However, when you are going to use Humvees or things in your video game, just like if I wanted to use a certain building in a movie I was making, you do have to go to that company, because you do have to go to the building. And if they are licensing out, I mean, the Humvee is intellectual property. It's intellectual property. Now, what is great here, though, is whether it's fair use or artistic license or something like that, I think because they're so different in what they're trying to achieve, the judge was able to rule in Activision's favor. And I think, in a way, it's a strange thing now that if you want to... I've always found it strange that buildings can be copywritten because they are there. And if you're not coming out and saying, well, the reason you have to be careful, like, for instance, we've talked about on the John Campea show, that apparently Apple, although I have no confirmation of this, apparently Apple does not like it when villains use their products on screen, which I can understand. Because on screen, if, say, a serial killer was using Apple computers to triangulate his or her victims on some TV show or on a movie, Apple wouldn't necessarily appreciate that. They might say, well, we don't want our product associated with serial killers, which I completely understand. So it's kind of a crazy thing. But in the case of this judgment, I got to feel that it was a victory for artistic expression somehow, because at the end of the day, it's getting increasingly more difficult to create verisimilitude in a movie or, say, in a video game, because if you had to pay licensing fees if you want to do a game set in New York City and you want to make it realistic, because everybody knows verisimilitude is always a good thing to have in video games. Well, you can't do it. You'd go broke trying to pay licensing fees to everybody that gets something. Now, I understand you've got to be able to protect your I'm a firm believer, and if you own copyrights and things, you should get paid for those kinds of things. And I do think that perhaps in the case of using Humvees or something, they do use it a lot in the game. But in the case of suing them, I mean, we do live in the real world. But it's an iffy. I think there's definitely arguments to be made both ways. And I am certainly not one to get up here, and I'm not going to give you a definitive answer by what I think is absolutely right and absolutely wrong. I think in the case of what we were trying to do with Axanar, we absolutely probably would have. I've seen it myself. There was confusion in the marketplace. People that don't know anything about Axanar, they see the Vulcan scene now, and they're like, wait a minute, was this real Star Trek? Or people are like, these guys should have made real Star Trek, or whatever. There is absolutely a definitive argument that can be made. These guys were creating confusion in the marketplace. I know there's a lot of Axanar detractors that would say, nobody would ever mistake, your Vulcan scene isn't that good. Look, the Vulcan scene was a proof of concept thing we shot in an afternoon very quickly and simply, and it was designed to show what we could do, the potential of what you could do for literally a tiny fraction of what Star Trek has been produced for now. But anyway, I just think that this whole story was really, really interesting. Now, there's another story that I wanted to share with you all that I'll get into that later. But the first thing I want to do is jump into the letters. Oh, man, do I want to jump into letters, because I got a letter today that it just warmed my heart. And let me just say to the letter writer in advance, I want to thank you for writing this letter to me, because as you might know, I just love it when people pay attention. So as many of you know, I have been watching and loving Manifest, but I'm sure not for the reasons that the people involved in Manifest would like. I've been watching NBC's Manifest for 2 seasons now, and the penultimate episode of season 2 aired, and I even did a whole show on what I call the impossible premise. The premise of Manifest is a premise that cannot be solved, and the premise is that one day a plane coming back from the Caribbean, I think from Jamaica, somehow went from the Caribbean to New York City, and in mid-flight, it went through some kind of a time warp, and it landed 5 years after it left. And of course, when it landed, for everybody in the plane, it's like nothing happened. They went through some wacky turbulence, but for everybody else, their loved ones, 5 years went by. It was like the blip in Infinity War. So people got remarried, everybody was presumed dead on the plane. So that in itself might have been an interesting premise, but Manifest, not to be not just content with that. Manifest tells you that everybody on the plane, but including our core group of people, have now what are known as callings. They're having psychic visions about people they know, people they don't know, that are in some kind of trouble, and people that were on the plane who have these callings, it's now their job to go help the people in need. Now, both of this two-pronged premise, to my mind, both of them are what I call an impossible premise, because you can't ever solve there'll never be a satisfactory answer. You can't ever give anybody, I can't imagine any audience, it'll end up being so outlandish that nobody would believe it. So Manifest, which by the way, I think has a good cast. I like the actors. I really do. But they are faced with increasingly more ridiculous plot lines. And this whole idea about these callings presupposes that there is an intelligence out there telling them what to do. Not only figuring out the future, but also where all these people are. Like, it's not just the people on the plane. It's this intelligence is, of course, looking in on everybody, because if it wasn't, how would it know who needs help where, and when. So it's this, whatever this intelligence is, it's just, whatever is going on, they can never solve it unless it's God or something like that, which would be silly. But I keep watching because I find the fact that the show, Robert Zemeckis is a producer on the show. I think Jack Rapke, who's a big agent in Hollywood, powerful agent, I think he's involved with it. The show amuses me to no end because the cast does the best job they possibly can with this gobbledygook. And I tune in every week just to see what are they going to do this week. So that's why, I love Manifest for reasons they probably don't want me to love it for, but it doesn't matter. If you like something, who cares why you like it? As long as you enjoy it. As I say to everybody, I'll never tell you not to love something. If you love something, doesn't matter what anybody says. I love Manifest, and I know it's absurd. So if anybody comes at me and, Rob, you rail against Picard, but how can you like Manifest? Well, because I find Manifest to be exactly what it's trying to be. And that's why I admire the show for whatever reason. But my man Ken B wrote me a letter about Manifest, and I think I might have to put on my glasses. Ken B wrote a letter, as many people did, but I had to read this because, oh yeah, Ken B, take it away. Hi, Rob. I'm back to once again write about my favorite sci-fi show and yours. No, not Star Trek. I'm, of course, talking about NBC's Manifest. I'm writing to you after having just finished watching the penultimate episode of Manifest Season 2, which I busted out last night. I have so many, I'm adding that, I'm editorializing that. I have so many thoughts about the absurdity of this show, but in an effort to organize my thoughts, I'm going to focus on the topic of villains today. In terms of villainy, Season 2 can be broken down into 3 main arcs because it's not enough that all this stuff's going on. They have to keep distracting you from the fact that they're never going to answer the mysteries of the show, that they keep compounding and getting more ridiculous. But okay. In terms of villainy, Season 2 can be broken down into 3 main arcs. When the season started, the mysterious Major and her fellow U.S. government agents were depicted as the main villains. The Major impersonated a psychiatrist and slowly worked her way towards gaining knowledge of Sanvi's medical research. Sanvi is a main character in the show. Beautiful, beautiful Indian woman. East Indian doctor from India. Eventually, her cover was blown, so she broke into Sanvi's lab and disappeared. The lab theft would seem to suggest a setback for our main characters, but in actuality, it has no effect. Despite having her research stolen, Sanvi appears to just pick up where she left off and continues her research as the season goes on. With the Major in the wind, the second arc shifts the focus away from a government conspiracy and towards religion and hate groups. We're introduced to 2 opposite extremes, the Church of the Returned and the Xers. The Church of the Returned is led by Adrian, a former plane passenger, and preaches that all of the 828 plane passengers are prophets. The Xers, on the other hand, are a hate group that thinks that the 828 passengers are evil and subhuman. Come on, isn't this the best? The 2 groups belabor on for a number of episodes as the main characters are faced with numerous callings that warn them about the evils of one group or the other. Eventually, the church is disbanded after a nightclub fire, and a couple of episodes later, the Xers are all arrested. It sounds anticlimactic when I put it like that, doesn't it? Absolutely not. Nothing in Manifest is anticlimactic. Every show ends. The last episode ended with a wedding, and it ended with newborn babies having callings too, because they're the product of a person on the plane and a person who wasn't on the plane. So they've passed on their calling gift through genetics to their baby. It doesn't matter. It's Manifest, or I'd like to say Manifest Destiny. The 2 groups belabor on for a number of episodes as the main characters are faced with numerous callings that warn them about the evils of one group or the other. It sounds anticlimactic when I put it that way, doesn't it? That's because it was. I'm left asking the question, what was the point of the Xers and the Church of the Returned? After spending so many episodes painting both groups as the potential big bads, the conclusion of that arc has done nothing to answer any questions or move the plot forward. Because it can't. Because the writers don't know. So they have to do things that, they can, let's have a religious hate group. Okay. So this brings us to the final arc of the season, which focuses on 3 meth dealers. Oh yes, you heard that right. After tackling government conspiracy, hate groups, and religion, the writers decided to up the ante with some generic drug dealers. Throughout the show, the callings that the 828 passengers receive are depicted as forces of good that help Michaela solve crimes. One of the characters who's on the plane is a cop and has been using the callings to solve crimes, which of course causes problems with her bosses because they want to know, how are you so good at solving crimes? She can't exactly say, well, you see, I went through this time warp and I have these psychic callings. Who knows where they come from, but they help me solve crimes. They haven't been able to do that yet, but the introduction of the meth dealers is the first time we see a drastic shift in the depiction of the callings. When Michaela is arresting the dealers, she receives a calling that says, let him go. When she ignores the calling and proceeds with the arrest of one of the drug dealers, when she ignores the calling and proceeds with the arrest, one of the drug dealers sports an evil smile and tells her she'll regret this. Although never explicitly spelled out, it's implied that the drug dealers might be behind or are at least aware of the callings. When being booked at the police station, it's revealed to audiences that the 3 meth dealers match the 3 shadowy figures that Cal, the young boy, who is also on the plane, has been having nightmares about. At the end of the episode, the meth dealers escape a prison transport and kidnap Cal in order to get to Michaela. As it stands, the first 2 arcs worth of villains appear to have been nothing but a time waster. Both sets of big bads came and went without providing any long-lasting change or meaningful answers to our impossible premise. The third and final villain storyline of the season is somehow the most ridiculous. They're currently teasing that these 3 meth dealers might have some far-reaching impact on the overall story. However, history will surely repeat itself. These bad guys will be discarded and replaced with something else once the writers realize that they've written themselves into a corner yet again. The writers clearly have no answer to the show's initial premise, and instead just pull a new storyline out of their ass every few episodes. Perhaps one day I will be proven wrong, and will finally be given some satisfying answers, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Despite my low expectations, I still anxiously await next week's season finale. Sincerely, Ken B. Well, Ken, my man, you and I, we certainly park our shuttlecraft in the same shuttle bay. And you know what? I want to give a shout out to Connie at JBL in the experiential engagement department. I want to thank Connie for also being a Manifest fan. So Connie, if you're watching, shouts out to you, because you know what? There needs to be more of us in the world. By my count, there's like Den of Nerds does a Manifest recap, and I know you and Ken B, and we're all, I mean, we should have a watch party next week, because God forbid, who knows if Manifest is coming back. It was on the bubble last year. Maybe it'll come back for a 3rd season, and if it does, should we care? Yes, we should. So thank you very much. And by the way, if any of you are, in fact, not watching Manifest, I am just sorry. I cannot recommend you watch it. Unless you were in on the ground floor, there's better things to do with your time. But for those of us who are in on the joke, Manifest continues to entertain. And by the way, kudos to all the cast, because man, you kids, you crazy kids, whether you're young or old and you're in that cast, you guys are doing the best you can with what you get. So congrats to the people who make Manifest. I can't wait. Let's see. I got another letter here from Gary Medlock. Hi, Rob. My name is Gary, and I'm a 47-year-old chief financial officer in the UK. I've been watching you since day one, and despite having never seen a single episode of Star Trek, I continue to be glued to your show and your pure passion on the subject. I myself am a Star Wars OG addict, with Empire being the cinematic blood that courses through my body. I agree with you, man. As many people have heard me say on the show a million times before, I saw Empire Strikes Back 26 times in the theater, sat in the same seat at the 8th seat left side front row balcony at the late lamented UA 150 Theater, the greatest movie theater ever, that was on the corner of 6th and Blanchard in Seattle. And if you want to know where that is, it's right down the street from Amazon's new geodesic headquarters that looks like it could take off. Not unlike the First Order headquarters in the Duel of the Fates screenplay. Just closing my eyes and thinking of Hoth, Cloud City, or most importantly, Dagobah fills me with the childlike glee that only very special movies can do. Being a qualified accountant, coupled with being a reserved Englishman, it doesn't come natural to write to a YouTuber. But in these current times, I felt compelled to write and express my gratitude and appreciation for your show. Well, Gary, that's very nice of you. Thank you. Given the time difference, I don't get to see your show until late in the evening UK time. As such, I often find myself unwinding after a long day listening to and the eloquent discussion in sci-fi history or not so eloquent rant against Picard. No matter what the subject matter, whether I know about it or not, I find your breadth of knowledge and method of delivery captivating. I've learned so much in topics I knew nothing of, and you've encouraged me to broaden both my reading topics and movie choices. That, my friend, Gary, is news to my ears. That's like the greatest thing you can tell me. This brings me to my main reason for writing. When you first started your channel, you started an A to Z, pronounced Z, not Z, A to Z, of your favorite films. I'm fairly sure you didn't complete the alphabet. I did not. I found these shows so interesting and informative. Given the lack of current movie news, I was wondering if you could consider rekindling these and completing the 26 letters. I would love to hear your opinion on more films that I may not be aware of. If you did continue with this series of shows, I'm sure many of your followers would also enjoy the content. I would also love, yes, I use the word love, to hear a similar slew of shows regarding your favorite books. I've read far too little fiction in my time, and having seen the passion you show for the books you've read, I would like to hear more on your favorites. I don't know if you will ever read this email, even less act upon it, but if you do, can I end with saying the following? Thank you for all you have done and continue to do for our community, and I wish you, your family, and all of your followers the very best in these troubled times. My very best wishes, and stay safe, Gary. Well, Gary, first of all, sir, what a delightful letter. And you know what? You are not, you're one in a long line of people who have asked me to, I think I stopped at the letter F. When I first started Robservations, when I first started doing this, I really didn't know what I was going to do, to be honest. And I thought going through my movie collection and pulling out like 10 titles from my collection, not necessarily the best titles or not. I didn't want to focus on real mainstream stuff necessarily that everybody's seen. Just 10 interesting movies that I have for whatever reason that I like, and I have them. And I was going through the alphabet going, hey, and I think I stopped at F. I don't think I got to G. Well, you know what? People have been asking me to do short form videos, not these just chats, but videos they could just tune in on. And I think, Gary, it is a good time now to start up again. And I'm going to do the rest of the alphabet. And what I'll do is I'm going to I'll break out the original videos, and I'm going to list them. I'll put it on a playlist on the channel, but I will continue because people keep asking me about that, and I need to get back to it. And I feel like I've let people down. So I think that's a great idea. And by the way, it's really interesting to hear from somebody who, has never seen Star Trek, but watches the show. I mean, or listens to the show. I think that's really interesting. So thank you for that. I very much appreciate it. And it was great to hear from you. This letter comes from Horia Pantia. Panti or Horia Panti? Horia Panti. Hey, Robert. I've just about had my fill on being angry at the obliteration of Star Trek, and I set out to rewatch Babylon 5. It's been a decade, and I would like to watch it with the same eyes that managed to watch Picard. And man, is it magnificent. Would you rant on the topic for a while? Give us your thoughts. Also, in the context of Picard, would you allocate 5 minutes to see what the people saying it was plagiarizing Mass Effect 3 were talking about? I've got to take my jacket off because it's very hot in here. I also think you should get a look at the lore of that game and at the storytelling achieved as a comparison to what a game can do in this day and age. I swear all the creativity missing in sci-fi movies today is found within games. Thanks for making this quarantine more endurable. Will tip when I get a new job. Horia. Well, what an interesting letter, Horia. Listen, while I very much appreciate all the support on the channel I get, I just like the people writing and participating, and it's great to have you here. I don't believe you've ever written a letter before, so thank you for that. It's funny, today on the John Campea show, I was asked about what do I think one of the great redemption stories is in like film. And the first thing that popped into my mind was Andreas Katsoulis' Jakar from Babylon 5. That was literally the first thing that popped into my mind. Now, if you guys haven't watched Babylon 5, the core of what Babylon 5 is, the core of the franchise, was a 5-season series. And like a lot of sci-fi shows, the first season is a little hard to get through. It's a little slow going. But starting with season 2, we are off to the races. And I loved Babylon 5. I thought it was a terrific show. Now, look, is it perfect? No. I think J. Michael Straczynski's sometimes his comedy was a little heavy-handed, but it was really intriguing. And now it's sometimes, some people have told me it's really hard to watch because the visual effects were all done on a computer, early digital effects that are very, fan films visual effects are far more sophisticated than the visual effects in Babylon 5. But if you're watching it for pure story, it's really interesting, really compelling stuff. And I was a fan, and I'll tell you, from season 2, season 3, and halfway through season 4, unfortunately, they never knew if they were coming back. So Straczynski had to wrap up his overarching storyline basically at the end of, or in the middle of season 4. And season 5 is sort of a mixed bag, but I still think it's a monumental achievement in terms of science fiction television, and I would recommend it to everyone. I really, really liked it. I have only delved into the Mass Effect games a little, but your point about great sci-fi storytelling, certainly the Metal Gear Solid franchise, The Last of Us, God of War, Uncharted. There's so many great storylines now within video games, and sure, the narrative is designed to get you from one set piece, one gameplay set piece to the next, which I understand, but there is a lot of great, like Heavy Rain. Remember Heavy Rain? There's a lot of really interesting and compelling storylines going, and I think that's why people are always looking towards video games for narratives, but unfortunately, it's tough. It's tough to keep that going because a video game is by necessity telling a story to get you from gameplay to gameplay piece. And I do think a lot of storytelling, including Star Trek, suffers from a cut scene mentality. I see a lot of that happening in video games, in movies today. And a lot of the time they find out when they're going to make a video game, like, look, I loved Capcom's Onimusha. I love Devil May Cry. Do I think a Devil May Cry movie would work? Perhaps, but you'd really have to come up with a whole storyline, and maybe that storyline wouldn't be as compelling as playing Devil May Cry is. But, yeah. So there you go. Speaking of tips and super chats and all that, let me jump into that over here. I know people have been firing in things. I will go. Willow. Willow sends in a tip and says, "What are the hills alive with? Music." Ladies and gentlemen, you'll find out tonight, but as everyone knows, one of the great gaps in my cinematic education was Sound of Music. Until last night, I had never seen Sound of Music. And in the 5 years that I've known Elizabeth, she was always trying to get me to watch Sound of Music. She's like, "Well, you'll love Sound of Music. Why haven't you watched it?" I don't know. I don't know why. Robert Wise directed it, and I love Robert Wise. Come on, the man who co-directed West Side Story, the man who edited Citizen Kane. I love Robert Wise. And I just I didn't watch it. And they even bought me 2 years ago. Sophie bought me a Sound of Music Blu-ray for Christmas. Didn't watch it. So, for our whining about movies, tonight, episode number 9, Elizabeth and I, whining about movies. I finally watched a movie I'd never seen that she wanted me to watch, which was The Sound of Music. And I did watch it. So tune in tonight at 8 as Elizabeth and I consume a bottle of wine as we discuss The Sound of Music, ladies and gentlemen. I did watch it. Martin sends in a tip and says, "Greetings, Rob. The only form of Star Trek I have seen is the movies after 2009, but I still tune in every day to hear you talk about Picard. It has inspired me to watch the original shows. Should I start with the original series or Next Generation?" First of all, here's the thing. You have to start with the original series. Star Trek is the original series. If you haven't watched the original series, you don't truly understand, or as we like to say, if you're a Heinlein fan, you can never grok Star Trek. And what does grok mean? Grok is a word that was used in Stranger in a Strange Land. To grok something is to understand it in a holistic way. You have what I like to say, a three-dimensional understanding. You understand something from every aspect of it. To truly grok Star Trek, you have to have seen the original series. And look, I've said this a million times before. Do not watch The Cage. When you go back and you watch Star Trek, there was a mistake when it was first being made. And Star Trek, of course, has a very interesting history. They made a pilot for Star Trek that had Captain Pike, and it was called The Cage, and it was rejected by the network. So it was put up on a shelf. Then they made a second pilot where James Tiberius Kirk was introduced, even though there's a mistake in this episode, and it was called Where No Man Has Gone Before. And that is the actual pilot for the Star Trek show that was on the air. But it was aired as the third episode originally shown back in 1966, which throws it off. So if you watch it in order, you watch the first two episodes of Star Trek, and then you watch the pilot third, and everybody's in different costumes, and the Enterprise bridge looks different. It's very strange. So here's what you got to do. The first episode of the original series you have to watch before you watch anything is not The Cage, and I'm about to tell you why. You must watch Where No Man Has Gone Before. That is the first episode of Star Trek to watch. The Cage will be dealt with, and you will see The Cage in the context of Star Trek, in Star Trek the original series, only 2-part episode called The Menagerie, Parts 1 and 2. And that is the only way that you should experience The Cage. All the other little stuff that's in the actual episode, The Cage, is not canonical. The only stuff that you should pay any attention to is the episode, The Menagerie, Parts 1 and 2, and what appears in the history of the Enterprise. I don't want to ruin it for you because you're in for a treat. That's how you got to do it. So, yes, you got to start with the original series and then move and work your way up to TNG. Trust me, it is a journey worth taking. Martin sends in a tip and says, "Greetings, Rob. I just read that one. Calvin Bose, our man Calvin, says, when are you going to watch The Sound of Music? Then we can solve a problem like Robert. We may even send the nuns with the rulers after you to comply." Well, Calvin, I watched it last night, and I don't want to say anything. I'm not going to say anything really more than what I've already said about Sound of Music until tonight. Tune in, 8 o'clock tonight, Pacific Standard Time. Actually, it's Pacific Daylight Time now, to watch Whining About Movies, Episode 9, The Sound of Music. Elizabeth and I are going to drink a nice drop, and we'll share that with you, and I'll talk about what I thought of The Sound of Music. Joseph, the Picard fan, our fan Joseph, who's been here for a long time, writes in, "Oh, hi, Rob. I have this idea about an original comic book, a Batman-type vigilante. I already thought about the setting, time period, names, and even have a starting short story in mind and have the look of the character in my mind. All I need is to put it on paper. It's been itching me for weeks, and I know I have a good idea, but who knows? Ideas about the story are coming to me every day. What is the best way to pitch the idea once it's done to a major publishing house?" Well, Joseph, here's the thing. A major publishing house is not going to buy a pitch from you. That's not how it works. If you want to write it as a book or a comic, you'd probably have to do what I would suggest you do is you're going to have to write it. You're going to have to write it, and then something strange is happening outside. You're going to have to write it, and then you're going to have somebody draw it for you. But you are an artist. You're actually quite a good artist. I have your work. And I would suggest creating a comic book of your own and draw it, write it, and have it there, because what people want to see now is finished work. And you're talented enough that I think you could pull it off. So, and heck, I'll show it. Send me panels. That's what I would do. Star Wars Rock sends in a tip and says, is someone making a Call of Duty movie now? People are trying. I mean, I don't know if there's one before the cameras. I don't think that there is. Yeah, I don't know. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, if you critique someone else's work in a professional way, you should just say what you think, not come up with solutions. If you say you think it's confusing, slow, or other adjectives, don't force your own solutions to an issue on another creator's work. I don't know. I mean, I think part of criticism is saying that, look, if you're offering your opinion, you're offering your opinion. I mean, look, again, when you say solutions, that is pretty arrogant. And I know that when I've criticized things, I've said, well, maybe they should have done this or could have done that. And yeah, I think it's pretty arrogant for people to say, this is how it should have done. Even though we as fans have been saying that since the dawn of time. But yeah, I agree. So yeah. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, your channel rocks and is worthy of my $1. Would you buy that for $1? I like your positive shows more, but you're always authentic, which is most important. Today's Prince songs are Fury and Adore. Fury is a great song, by the way. And Adore's, I don't know if I love Adore. I don't know if I love it, but you never know. But Mukbang, I just appreciate the, by the way, is Mukbang your name? Is the name I love saying mukbang. It's kind of like an onomatopoeia. I want to believe it sounds like it is. I mean, I want to say that mukbang is like a dance club, and because you're a big Prince fan, it's like glam slam, mukbang. Like mukbang is downtown. It used to be in where Club Vertigo was, but now it's mukbang. I just love that. Or is that just your name? I don't know. Tell me. Which I think is great. Wow, Mark C. sends in a very generous super chat and says, Mark says, the similarities between you and the Fandom Menace is we love our genre. I've sent you a DM that gives the difference between a negative opinion and the Fandom Menace. Please read aloud. Oh, okay. I will do that. Hang on. Let me get my phone. I will read aloud from Mark C. See, isn't this amazing? Technology. It's just incredible what you can do. Okay. Oh, you sent me, wait, I didn't see this. You sent me I have an unread message from you. Okay, this is Mark C. He sent me a DM. That's a direct message on Twitter. He writes, the difference between people who are simply upset at a genre subject and the Fandom Menace. The Fandom Menace's motive is to, through a unified front, not just be upset, but to hopefully make enough noise and cost studios enough money to create change and to get our property back. If we can't get change, we'd rather see it die than continue being something than true to itself. I would agree with what you were trying to do, but remember, there's a lot of people, I would say, from an industry perspective, whether you like the finished product or not. There's a lot of people that work on movies and television, especially people who just work on set. They have absolutely no control over the finished product. They don't even know sometimes. There's people, I've been on sets where most of the crew hasn't even read the script. They can't. The scripts are on lockdown. All they know is what they're doing that day. And the people that are working on these things are workaday folks that do a fantastic job. So I would never want to see, I always think it's better. Look, I might hate Star Trek Picard and hate Star Trek Discovery, but I'm glad that they are, in fact, getting made. And I'm glad that people are working. I'm glad that writers are working. But most of all, I'm glad that crews are being employed. Effects people are being employed. There's a lot of great crew people. I even know people that work on Picard. And I love the fact that they're working and they're getting paid and they're honing their own craft. And as they work on Picard, they're becoming better at what they do. And then they can go on, hopefully, sometime in the future. I mean, one of my friends that I've known for a long time who worked on Picard, who worked on Westworld, I was very proud. We'd never worked together on anything, and he did some effects work on Tango Shalom for me. And I never worked with him, and I was very impressed by the work he did, and that was a real thrill. And if he hadn't had the experience that he'd already had, I wouldn't have been able to, well, I mean, I paid him. He got paid to work on Tango Shalom, but he did great work. So I do want to see work continue. I just want to see it improve, because one of the things that I find most distressing is just how many producers are working on Picard, and that was necessary because of how Star Trek developed and the things like that. But I do want to see people. I do want to see people employed, and yes, I want things to be better. So I understand what you're saying, but I think one of the dogs is banging on the garage door. But anyway, that's an interesting perspective. But I agree. I want our properties, and I don't necessarily want our properties to be the way they've always been. I want them to advance and grow and evolve. Everyone's like, hey, you just want Star Trek to be the way it was back in the 1960s. And I'm like, no, I don't. Why would that? I want Star Trek to be reflective of how great writing has become on television today. And there's a lot of it. And when I say something like Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, do I mean like, do I want Star Trek to be a show with Muppets? No, I want Star Trek to be a fully realized genre show that is brilliantly written. And that's it. I want it to be, obviously I want all the, I just assume the tech credits are going to be first rate, but really all I want is a great story well told. At the end of the day, that's what I want. And that's it. But Mark, I want to thank you. I mean, for a guy who constantly calls himself a toxic fan, I respect you, and I think you're exactly the kind of fan that all communities need. And see, Mark and I have a constant dialogue back and forth. He can DM me live on a show, and I'll read it. How many people can say that? Anyway. Brandon sends in a super chat and says, you're the best channel for pop culture. I love your approach and perspective. I found out about you when you went on with Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers. Keep venturing out and keep up the amazing work, my friend. One of the things I think you have to remember about all of this that I think people forget is we're still trying to be entertaining. I think a lot of the time, like I've got my own brand of entertainment, but Doomcock clearly goes above and beyond. I mean, he even does sketches with his stuffed bird companion. I mean, it's like, it's a show. It's an entertaining show. It's not like he's some firebrand politician out there trying to foment, hate groups. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing. Great stories, well told. And our approaches to these things might be different, but we're all still in we're the same genre. We're all fans. The way we express our fandom, I mean, hell, have you ever been in a D&D game, man, and tried to navigate, or a Magic the Gathering game? We heard from a listener yesterday about what that can be like. Brutal. But I appreciate, Brandon, for you to say that. Mark Evans sends in a tip and says, hey, Rob, just testing if I can send a tip. Thanks for help creating this community. Well, thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Ian sent in a super chat too. Thanks, Ian. I appreciate that. Justin McCullough sent in a $5 super chat and said, hey, man, any good canon recommendations for tonight? Okay. One day I think I should do a whole show on this. What you need to watch is Canon's, what I think of as Canon's magnum opus. But if you can, there's two versions of it. You've got to find the international version, which if you can get the Blu-ray, it's on there. Shout Factory. Scream released a fantastic Blu-ray. Canon's magnum opus, Tobe Hooper's 1985 Life Force, starring Steve Railsback and Mathilda Mann. I mean, never have you seen a woman with a more beautiful body just randomly walking around London naked. And she's also a space vampire, which is doubly cool. So I would suggest that. But if you can't find that, I would look for American Ninja with Michael Dudikoff and Steve James. And if not, read, I think it's called Electric Boogaloo, the story of Cannon films. There is a documentary about Cannon films that is wildly entertaining, and you'll get a taste of all of those Cannon movies. Invasion USA is a good one. So yeah, there you go, Justin. Go forth and report back. Evan Newman sends in a tip and said, I second Gary's letter on the A to Z movies list. Is your stack to G movies still gathering dust on your old desk in the laundry room? It's funny, I did have my stack of G movies. No, it's probably still on the shelf. I've been moving around on my physical media collection, so I'm sure it's there. I watched a lot of new stuff last year because of your A to F lists. Well, Evan, music to my ears. I need to go. I really need to do that. I really need to do that. And And that's nice that people want that. You know what? I might as well. Simon sends in a tip and says, Rob, you owe no apology for expressing how you really feel about current Star Trek. By the way, I got a Picard survey and I can't wait to expose my disappointment. How would you sum up your main issue with Picard? I think the title Star Trek needs to be renamed. Well, look, as I've said, I think Picard had a lot of really interesting and compelling ideas in it, but it was all over the place. There was no... I mean, if I was in a class writing my 5-paragraph essay where you have your thesis statement in your first paragraph, and then you make your argument and then your conclusion, I think the argument stage of Picard is wildly divergent. It starts out with synths revolting and blowing up the Utopia Planitia shipyards and then what? I mean, we don't even know. Okay, so the Romulans, the Zhat Vash, want to, like, as if those synths are the only synths in the galaxy. The galaxy is a big place, and they believe, the Zhat Vash believes that they're supposed to destroy all synthetic life in the galaxy. We don't even know what that means. I guess the producers, as I've said before, just want us to believe that a machine in human form is synthetic life. And that machines, it's not synthetics. Synthetics is different from androids. The word synthetic still, I think, is synthetic life. If you're talking synthetic life, which is what I think you are supposed to be talking about, that's different than just machines. And I feel that in Picard, you don't even know. Like, they don't even know. Why is Memory Alpha arguing whether or not Captain Picard died? Picard died. Whether his memory engrams were downloaded into a synth body, Captain Picard is dead. Dead. So, there you go. That's one of the things that but I think Star Trek Picard should be renamed. It's not Picard anymore. Well, I guess you could say it's literally, it's like what V'ger said. I think everybody should start calling Picard Unit. I think that's because that's what he is. He's not Picard anymore. Picard died. He's something else. Fergal Kelly sent in a super chat and said, hey, Rob, have you watched Ozark Season 3? What an ending. Hell yes, I watched Ozark Season 3. And I have to say, man, I love Ozark. I think it's so great. Elizabeth got me watching it, and those 3 seasons are great. And I thought Season 3 really was terrific. I really loved it. Good on them. What a great show. Tiberius Monkson in a super chat said, good afternoon, Rob. Hope you and your family are doing well. Can you name the characters in fiction you feel are worthy of wielding Thor's hammer Mjolnir? Wow. The characters in all of them? the characters in fiction. Wow. Job from the Bible. I think Job could probably wield Mjolnir. That was the first thing that came to mind. Job from Scripture. If he could wield Mjolnir, he might have had a much better life. But he got his reward in the end, and I think he would be able to wield Mjolnir. I bet Frodo Baggins could be, probably Samwise before Frodo. Samwise Gamgee could probably wield Mjolnir. What's the name of the lawyer? Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. He might be able to wield Mjolnir. Yeah, perhaps. Those are the things that come to mind right off the top of my head. What an interesting question. Simon says, I would love to hear you and Nerdrotic critique Picard Season 1. Yeah, I would love to. You know what, though? Here's the thing. Here's what I would like to do. I would love to do, if I had my druthers, if somebody said, Rob, if you wanted to set up a Picard discussion, I would love to get together. I would make it. Here's my Avengers, my dream team of a Picard recap discussion. I'd want to get Andre from Midnight's Edge. I'd want to get Critical Drinker, Dave Cullen, Nerdrotic, maybe Chris Stuckman and Jeremy Johns, because I would, I have to every side represented, and Red Letter Media. There's probably more, but off the top of my head, and I would love to, because you wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want it to just be a bash fest. I mean, maybe Hector Navarro, because he really likes modern Star Trek. I'd like to get his perspective. He's a smart dude. And maybe Jason Inman and Ashley. Yeah, I mean, it would be it'd be interesting, because I don't look, if a lot of the people I like if it was just Dave Cullen, Critical Drinker, me and Doomcock and Andre or Rob or somebody from, it would just be a one-sided thing. It would only be interesting if we had a really cool roundtable discussion about the merits and the drawbacks of the show. Although I don't know if we could. But yes, I wouldn't mind going on with Gary. I mean, Gary and I, although it would be a bash fest. Although, if Gary and I did it, I think I could say, look, we've both come out very strongly already about this show. Let's pull back and discuss elements of the show in a way where we're not necessarily being immediately critical, but let's examine the ideas that the show does present and whether or not, I mean, I think that would be hard, though. Francisco Matallana, it could be because 2 L's is a Y, right? Matallana sent in a super chat and says, "Hey, Rob, did you see the trailer for Gotham High?" I did not see the trailer. I only read the description of the book. Gotham High is a new young adult comic book that DC is putting out where Bruce Wayne is, I don't know if he's Chinese or half Chinese, but he's from a Hong Kong industrialist family that moves to America, and it's about the Batman characters in high school. At first, I was like, well, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. But DC Comics has been publishing a number of young adult reimaginings of their characters, and within that context, to me, it's an Elseworlds story. I know a lot of people have been screaming bloody murder about it, but they have been putting it out, and they've been putting out these young adult looks at the DC universe. To me, it's another Elseworlds tale. I think it's kind of wacky, but they've been doing that, and as an Elseworlds tale, I'll buy into that. I'll watch it. I mean, I'm not going to be like, what the hell is this? Although I think at a time when comic book readers are leaving in droves and the comic book industry is in a horrible situation right now, it would be nice to see a return to the core values that built comic books up and built the fan base up in the first place. I think we need that more than ever. And I don't know if Gotham High is the right way to do it. Anyway. Stub McShave says, one positive thing with the new Star Trek is that it has made people aware and interested to check out the earlier Star Trek series. Absolutely. The people, I can't tell you, the great thing about Star Trek 09 is how many people went back and read the original series, which I think is terrific. Yeah, absolutely. Journey's End sent in a super chat and says, I thought you might appreciate the production predicament we're currently in. We're in post finishing VFX on a short called Stay Indoors. For real? Are you going to put in the end of the credits, special thanks to the corona pandemic for making sure we practice what we preached and we got our movie done? That's crazy. It's a horror comedy about a pandemic virus forcing a woman to stay indoors, trapped with a fly carrying the virus. Wrote and filmed it 3 years ago. Dude, that's okay. Let me tell you a trick for all of you budding filmmakers who want to break in or at least hone their craft. If you want to get a film played at a film festival, you can go out and make your big statement, but if you can make a short film that is quick, succinct, precise, and shows a certain level of wit, that the premise you just described is, sure, people are going to be like, wow, there's the Breaking Bad episode, The Fly, but you've taken it a step further, how The Fly becomes like the most dangerous thing in the world. I love this idea. Wow, what a great idea. And you go on to say, and now it's completely unintentionally on the nose. That's so good, though. And by the way, good on you. What's really funny about, like, You never know. It might have taken you 3 years, but you're getting it done. It's the perfect time, because when it finally comes out, when you finally submit it to festivals, it'll have that much more punch. Tango Shalom has taken a long time to get made, and when they started it, they were talking about a recession, and as we've moved through post, that kind of made the movie sort of anachronistic, and now the characters are talking about how businesses are closing and business is bad, and suddenly we look like we're really really smart now, but even though we're not. But use this. I think it's terrific. I think it's terrific that you've done this, and I want to see this movie. So tell us where we can see it. Good luck doing the film festival circuit. I think you're probably going to get a lot of attention for it. That's great. The fan Dumb Menace sends in a tip and said, I hate Star Trek Discovery. I hate Star Trek Picard. I hate modern Star Wars. I hate Marvel. I hate just to hate because I can't myself create. I hate just to hate because I can't myself create. Yo, what's up? I want others to hate what I hate. Hate is infectious, and I want to spread it. Long live the hate. Okay. I mean, it's funny, and I guess it comes from me being a James Bond fan. Growing up, there's good James Bond movies and there's bad James Bond movies. But I've learned that I just like James Bond movies. Now, I can't help what James Bond movies are being made, but because you get a good one and a bad one, I mean, even the Daniel Craig era, like, I loved Casino Royale. I'm a Quantum of Solace apologist. I really was disappointed by Skyfall, and I hated Spectre. Now, I love James Bond, but I can sit there and go, Spectre is really lackluster, and coming off of Skyfall, especially the end, is just ludicrous. And I don't understand how that movie got made the way it got made. I think it's ludicrous, and I look at it and I'm like, how did they not know it was not ludicrous? And it's crazy to me. But with Bond, it's such a mixed bag. Every other movie is really good, or it's sort of good. I mean, it comes and goes. So, and when I was born, when I started watching James Bond movies, there had already been almost a decade of Bond films. There probably was a decade of Bond films already. So the franchise had 10 movies. And so it was already a mixed bag. So I didn't expect excellence from Bond. But with original Star Trek, I love the original Star Trek. And if you look at it, I would say 75% of these 79 original episodes of Star Trek, 75% of those are good to great. And that was what I was used to, and that's what I grew up with, and that's sort of what's been ingrained. And remember, Star Trek The Next Generation didn't debut until 21 years after the original series did. So Star Trek existed for 21 years before there was any other Star Trek. It was just the original crew. And you got to watch the original crew grow up. And while Star Trek V, up to 1987, from 1966 to 1966 to 86 which is when Star Trek The Voyage Home came out. The Voyage Home even finished off a trilogy, the Star Trek, you can call it what you want. I always thought of it as the Star Trek Middle Age trilogy, because Star Trek II, Star Trek III, and Star Trek IV are as much about growing older. And what was interesting for me, I watched my characters grow and age within the universe. And that was always incorporated into the story. They lived, they grew, and they were dealing with other parts of their life. So what was interesting, if you grew up in the time, you got 20 years of a Star Trek that began in 66 and ended with The Voyage Home. And in a way, that's a really interesting thing, unless you watch soap operas where characters 50 years could have been on a soap opera for 50 years. There's something really interesting about that. And for me to have those 79 episodes, the animated series where a lot of the crew, most of the cast and crew came back, most of the cast and a lot of the writers came back, then the motion picture, then Star Trek 2, 3, 4. It was really interesting to have that bit of pop culture to grow up with in my formative years. And then there were the Star Trek novels, even after there was the Bantam novels, of course. And then when the motion picture came out, Pocket Books took over, and you got some really interesting Star Trek novels, and there was DC Star Trek comics. So there was a lot of Star Trek in that 20-year period of time, and it all felt of a piece. It all felt like it was sort of cohesive. So there was this cohesive universe for 20 years. And as I've told you, that's my theory about pop culture is it usually lasts like 20 years. But for 20 years, Star Trek was very cohesive. And then with Next Generation, you had Roddenberry coming back. And really, the first 2 seasons of Next Generation they were rough. Not just the final product, but actually making them were. Season 2 of Next Generation had to deal with the writer's strike in '88. And it was rough, but you still had that 20-year section, and that's why Star Trek means so much to me, because my entire youth there was always Star Trek, and it was growing and evolving, and I was seeing things happen that were good things, and there was a continuity there, and the writers that were writing the novels were really, I mean, that's also a thing about Star Trek that gets me, is that the novelists were putting so much into the Star Trek universe, and the stories that they were coming up with and the continuity they were dealing with and all that was really interesting. So yes, the quality of those early novels were of varying degrees. Some of them were crazy. Barbara Hambly's Ishmael, I mean, that was some crazy shit. Della Van Heiss's Killing Time, that's a crazy Star Trek novel that Gene Roddenberry was not happy about. But it was all very, very interesting, but it was still of this piece. So for 20 years, there's this solid element of Trek that was, from the time I was born till the time I literally was in college. And there was all of this Star Trek that none of it really let me down. Sure, there was bumps in quality, but for the most part, it was pretty strong. I mean, think about that. You had 4 Star Trek movies. I love the motion picture, which is something that you go from a TV show and blown up to the big screen. Then you had this sort of middle-aged trilogy where you dealt with our characters and mortality and getting older and what did it mean. And my young fictional characters, I watched get older, which was really kind of interesting. So if you're a Star Trek fan, an OG Star Trek fan, I mean, I obviously wasn't watching it, it was first on TV from 66 to 69, but it was still, when I started watching it in strip syndication in the 70s, and all of that, and during that time we had Alien and Star Wars and Logan's Run, and then all the great fantasy films of '82, Blade Runner, E.T., The Thing, Poltergeist. That was Star Trek 2 as well. So there was a period of time where everything we were getting was amazing. And the idea that Star Trek would have ever let me down was something that didn't really exist until, '87. And that was sort of interesting. But yeah, what was I saying? So don't hate anything. You can hate things, but to me, hate's wasted. Like, you can dislike something. I hate the way corporate culture is colliding with storytelling. At the studio level, it used to be you had maverick filmmakers who were dealing with studio heads. It was personalities that were creating these things. Alan Ladd basically like, well, George, this Star Wars idea of yours, no one else wants to make it, but I saw graffiti, I'll sign off. It was 2 dudes. You didn't have to pre-market Star Wars. You didn't. No one had ever seen anything like it. Now, corporate culture has taken over the creative impulse at this level. This is something new. It's something new. And I think we're going through an evolutionary period of time where, I mean, TV writers will tell you, ask any TV writer about network notes. My God. But as far as Hollywood is concerned, things are changing, and the corporate interests and the way corporations do business and how great stories are told are completely, as I've said a million times, diametrically opposed. They're trying to figure out, well, how do we make it all work within the context of that? And Star Trek, by the way, is being made now by a corporate way of thinking. There isn't a strong showrunner. What's really interesting, when we were doing the Blu-rays for Star Trek The Next Generation, when we sat down and did our Inside the Writer's Room, and you dealt with Renee Echevarria, and you dealt with Naren Shankar, and you had Brandon Braga and Ron Moore, that was really this core group of writers overseen by Michael Piller, of course, and Jerry Taylor, that really crafted what Star Trek The Next Generation became. And they were all on the same page and all kind of working together, but Michael Piller was over there and Rick Berman was over there, and you felt like there was a regime that existed to make Star Trek, and everybody there, they lived and breathed it. There was no, I feel now that what Secret Hideout is doing and what Bad Robot was doing before, it's all very corporate. It's driving the machine of their companies and all that, as opposed to being individuals. Star Trek feels like it is now, it's become, the actual creation of Star Trek has become corporatized. It's not like a corporation oversees it and then you have these creators that are, right in there. But, I could be wrong. But don't hate. Don't give in to hate. It leads to the dark side. Bob Quall says, and I just showed up. What do you, wait, no Trek synth talk? Wait, too soon on that. Trek synth talk as I'm typing. Not kidding. Order is restored. Rob, Dirty Nerdy says, Rob, did you see Major Grin's latest video? Apparently Kurtzman wanted Star Trek Picard to be like Game of Thrones. Of course they did. Because why wouldn't they? They have to have something else that they can emulate. We don't want to make it original or new. We got to make it look like that thing over there. I mean, it's so obvious. Why was there an incestuous or an incestuous relationship implied between Narek and Narissa? Like, what was the point of that? I don't understand. I mean, if you're going to pull it, use it. But they never did. It was pandering and stupid. But anyway, that's interesting. I have not seen that. So Major Grin is somebody that's been doing these awesome videos showing what original Star Trek is like, all Star Trek, using examples and how modern Star Trek utterly fails. Picard has utterly failed. And I can't say I haven't been tickled by them. Claudius sends in a tip and says, doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzels with noodles. Doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzel with noodles. Bonjour, Robert. Looking forward to tonight. If you say you dislike the sound of music, you will confirm your conversion to the dark side. I hope you have a red Kyber crystal handy. Well, Claudius, tune in and find out. Tonight at 8 o'clock on the Burnettwork, episode 9 of Whining About Movies with Elizabeth Gwendolyn Bell. Woohoo! Anonymous sends in a tip and says, Rob, keep up the great work. Your love for Star Trek is apparent. Your criticisms of new Trek storytelling and world building are constructive and on point. More importantly, you're not fighting a culture war with each episode. No. Although I think wanting to have good Star Trek is a culture war. Look, I understand. And here's the thing. I always say, here's the thing, as people have been pointing out to me. I believe in social justice. I believe that people, the downtrodden and people who haven't had a voice, should have a voice. But they shouldn't have a voice at the expense of good characters and good storytelling. You can't and I'll tell you, ultimately, it does a disservice. You have to have great stories and great characters first. And if you want to address issues, do it like The Twilight Zone did. Sometimes, like, it was heavy-handed, like the monsters are due on Maple Street. Other times, not so much. A Stop at Willoughby might have been a little heavy-handed, but I got the point, even as a kid. Great stories should come first. And if you want to have a message in those stories, well, certainly do that. But do it in the context of the story. It does nobody any good if your agenda overrides your idea to have great stories and great characters, because what you've done is you've destroyed the very thing that you want to carry your message forward. And I just don't understand that. Agenda-based storytelling never works. It never works. And by the way, it gets horribly dated very quickly. You have to tell stories that are universal. You have to tell stories that will transcend time, not be of whatever you are bitching about this week. That was the thing when I watched Damon Lindelof doing interviews for Watchmen. I'll never forget when he said, when TV writers get together, they like to out woke each other. And I'm like, well, there you go. There's the Damon Lindelof just explained in a nutshell everything wrong with modern television. They like to out woke each other. Yeah, I don't need to fight a culture war. It's not my job to fight a culture war. It's my job here is to be entertaining and talk about shit that I love and celebrate what's good and rail about Star Trek because I want it to be good. Tiberius Monk sends in a super chat and says, any underappreciated Netflix shows you recommend to watch? I recommend the German shows Babylon, Berlin, and Dark. Those are great shows. And those are beautifully produced shows. Well, I would say I don't know if like The Kingdom is underappreciated. Season 2 of that dropped. I think Sex Education was a really great show that no one really talks about. Gillian Anderson, a British show that I thought was really really good. There's so much stuff on Netflix. Their Harlan Corbin mysteries have been pretty good. They've done a couple of those, and they're pretty good. I'm enjoying those. And they're going to do they made a deal to turn 10 of his books or 20 of his books into more of these long form 10 episode mysteries. So those are good. I got a tip from Anonymous. Love the show, Rob. 333 pennies for your thoughts on transporters. A quick way to get from point A to point B, or B, murder machines. After all, they basically dematerialize you at your point of origin and create a copy at your destination. I've talked about that philosophical concept that the transporter destroys you. But I think it just pulls apart the way in my mind, in my head canon, is I don't think it's not like the Prestige. It's not making copies of it. You can't take a transporter pattern that's in the buffer and then just keep rematerializing versions of yourself. No, I think that actually, I believe that the atoms that a transporter transports are the same atoms, and they're taken apart and put back together from where you left to where you land. So they're not destroying you, and what you get is not a copy. I don't believe that. I believe it's actually you. That technology has figured out a way to make it actually you. At least that's the way I've always thought about it. It's not making a copy. It's actually you. And although maybe not, but in my mind it was. Sam O'Neill sends in a super chat and says, "Hi Rob, what is the process studios go through to book a movie release date?" Well, there's a lot of factors. I mean, first of all, they want to what is their audience? When is the best time? Like, if you've made a movie, where is the best place to put this movie to appeal to the widest possible audience? Summer and the holidays are first and foremost, because that's when you've got kids out of school, you've got all families available to go. But if you've got more of, say, an adult-oriented film that's based on a literary property, like a movie like, I'm only saying The Goldfinch, not because it's great, necessarily a disappointing movie, actually, but like with The Goldfinch, which was a literary adaptation of Donna Tartt's novel, The Goldfinch, they position it maybe in the fall, where prestige titles will come out and still get awards buzz. They have to save, I mean, sure, prestige awards movies will come out around Christmas time and Thanksgiving as well, but they tend to get buried beneath the blockbusters, so it depends. It really depends on where the audience is. If you have movies like The Fast and the Furious, those are summer movies, beautiful people wearing tight shirts and hot pants and whatever. Those movies are sort of inherently summer-based films, so you're like, okay, we're going to put this out in the spring or the summer. April or May is when traditionally the Fast and Furious movies have been seen. So that's kind of how they decide to do that. And then they have to see, well, are the other studios dropping their tentpole properties then as well? And then they begin the dance of when, in fact, who they can compete against, what is their competition. So basically, it's really about knowing what your audience is and knowing when you can best reach that audience. It's pretty simple. Dancing Dog sent in a tip and says, "Rob, Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine were syndicated and didn't have to deal with network suits. Did they have it easier to run these shows since they didn't have to deal with the heads of NBC, CBS, or ABC? Your thoughts?" Absolutely. For those of you who don't know, Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and then Voyager was on UPN, but they were syndicated. As a matter of fact, The Next Generation did some trailblazing. It was really the first hour-long syndication. What syndication is shows are sold to either networks or local stations to be programmed whenever they want. Game shows, talk shows. Traditionally, those were things that were in the syndicated market. There was not a lot of one-hour dramas that were made directly for syndication. Next Generation was one of the very first success stories with the one-hour syndicated format. And so Next Generation did not air. It would air whenever a local station wanted to air it. So that was something new. And because of that, you don't have networks giving you notes. Like, when you're making a TV show and you have a rough cut or something, you have to send that rough cut to the suits, and they'll watch it and they'll give you notes. And sometimes the notes they'll give you are crazy. Now, one of the things, if you watch, I'll tell you a story about Enterprise. One of the notes that they got from the network. Now, Enterprise was not strip syndicated, and so it worked differently. There were network notes to be had, and for instance, two of the things that stick out right away was it was the idea originally for Rick Berman and Brandon Braga that the first season of Enterprise would be entirely Earthbound. And the season would end with the Enterprise, the NX-01, being launched. And you would have dealt with the political machinations of the Vulcans and Earth and all the different kinds of people. And then there would also be a right stuff element to it, which, come on, man, that sounded great. The network said, no way. You know, you guys got to get out into space. But that's why the show was called Enterprise, and they didn't want to call it Star Trek right away because they weren't going to be Star Trekking right away. And another thing that happened was, and this is a true story, the networks thought because of 10 Forward, they're like, well, you know, you've got like a mess hall on the ship, on the Enterprise, not understanding the difference between, say, the Enterprise D and 10 Forward and the NX-01. They literally inquired as to whether a band, like whatever the hot band, like a boy band or Selena Gomez or I don't know, whoever, could appear each week on the show. And they're like, well, you know, we're out in space. Like, and the network notes, that was an actual note. So yes, the problem with network notes is, again, you're dealing with people that are responding to whatever marketing data they're getting and demographics and whatever. They're not storytellers. They're network executives. They're not storytellers that are now put in a position to comment on the stories being told that are being made by the actual storytellers, the writers, the producers, the directors that have to do these shows. And yet network executives are allowed to give notes. So that is how there is major dysfunction in that system. And ask, if you ever meet somebody who's a TV writer, ask them about their network notes. Every television writer and producer has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. Jason S. sends in a tip and says, our Constitution may be put to the test in the coming weeks. Questions that will have to be answered is if the government can declare at any time there is an emergency and then suspend the Constitution of the Bill of Rights at will. That could be dangerous. Well, Jason S., I am not certainly a constitutional scholar, so I can't speak to that. But you're right. I mean, and that's where the rights of states to come in and the rights of what the federal government is going to do. We'll see what happens. I mean, where do states' rights begins and where do when does federal jurisdiction end? It'll be interesting to see. There's already been shenanigans in the stimulus bill. Things have been put in there. It's disheartening. It's disheartening to read that at this point in time, to see, and both sides are at fault, the Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, look, I feel that the federal government, the response to this crisis has been lackluster at best. They're really playing catch up. Finally, yesterday, Trump had his press conference and he was finally, admitting to, our response was slow. We were slow to act. And it was very disappointing to see how our federal government responded. This is exactly the kind of thing that our federal government is set up, by the way, to prevent. Maybe not on a boots on the ground level on a state by state basis, but overall, this is exactly, there has been many different think tanks and there's been a lot of, global pandemics have been gamed out by the military. They've been gamed out by federal think tanks that work at the federal level. This is exactly why in our healthcare system should have been ready for this and prepared. And the fact that we are woefully unprepared. I mean, I talked about the South Korean response the other day. The South Korea had its first outbreak. People say yes, but they're less. They're able. People are used to whatever. The way that South Korea went about dealing with this situation, like we didn't know what this outbreak is, so having tests, whatever. But we were woefully ill prepared. Now this is the kind of thing where whenever I say that film crews would deal with this, a film crew finds a problem, they'll recognize a problem, even if something happens that they're unaware of, whether there's a catastrophic failure of something, a film crew will pivot and fix the problem. There's no blaming, there's no recriminations. It's like, let's fix this problem. And they do. That's why I love working on movies so much. And I think that the federal response has been, it's been lackluster. And that's only because I think that again, we have to start looking at our healthcare system, all of our healthcare system, and on every level to see where people are, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail. But we'll see. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of, we have to be ever vigilant about our Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and that's why we have a Constitution. So when these kinds of things happen, we don't lose who we are fundamentally as Americans. The very basis of our country, the Constitution. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and said, well, Rob, hope all is well today. I wanted to know if for the special edition 400th issue of Robservations, we can get a giant-sized 3-hour-plus episode with special guest appearances from Gilbert and Tallulah. Oh, I can guarantee that. I was talking just yesterday at dinner if I should do an 8-hour episode of Robservations. Everyone knows I did a 300-minute show, but maybe for the 400th show, I'll do 8 hours or something and try and have guests come in. And I'm working on that already. And if anybody has videos that they want me to play on the 400th episode, send them in. Send them in. Claudius sends in a tip and says, name the episode. I signed on this ship to practice medicine, not to have my atoms scattered back and forth across space by this gadget. You know who, but which episode? As a clue, I'll add this. I like a brave man. That would be Space Seed, sir. That would be Space Seed. And that's what Khan Noonien Singh said to McCoy when he first woke up. And then McCoy said, it would be most effective if you cut the carotid artery right above. And that's when Khan said, I like a brave man. So there you go, Claudius. I hope I passed your test. Let's see. I got letters. I still got letters here. I got letters and people firing stuff in. Let's see what we got here. This letter comes from Hunter Hewitt, who says, Rob, with Morbius and Ghostbusters being moved to March 2021, I'm wondering if Top Gun Maverick is going to be the next movie to be pulled from the release schedule. Well, Hunter, a good question. That is a question that we were talking about on the John Campea show today. I think that the two big movies that are left are Top Gun Maverick and Tenet from the summer schedule. Those are both July films. I think we're going to find out soon, but we'll wait and see. I really think that we're now going to have to start and watch in 2-week increments how this is all going to go down. It'll be interesting to see how it does. There is hope. Look at the South Korean response to what's been happening. I think South Korea is hopefully everyone can learn from that response. But we'll see what's happening in the United States over the next 2 weeks. It'll be critical. And we'll just keep watching. But thanks for writing in. John D. This is great. John D. writes in and says, Rob, you mentioned that near the beginning of your YouTube show that you got a letter from a guy who said he and his wife didn't like to watch movies with profanity. Specifically, it was purchasing physical media of films that use God's name in vain, but I digress. And that you'd thought a long time about this letter and this profanity issue, and that it has no place in Star Trek. I'm honored you remembered my first email all these many months since, but you then said he's probably long gone from the channel by now. Well, first of all, the reason I said that was because I swear a lot. But then I realized I don't necessarily take the Lord's name in vain very much. What? I've been here the entire time. I've watched almost every single episode, some multiple times, not remembering for sure if I'd watched that one before. Yes, I'm still here, and I still doubt I'd ever seen a movie that needed to use God's name in vain to get their point across. Just wanted you to know I'm still here. Just wish you'd read my last email about problems with Picard. Toy ray gun not being used to heal Picard, how they had a clone body already for Picard even though they didn't know he was dying, where all the space orchids came from, and where they clearly said they had only 10 left. I really like the Picard letter I've written. I might have read that, John. And if I haven't, that doesn't mean I still won't. I've got so many, a lot of people have written to me lately. I have so many letters to get through, and I'm trying to bang through them. But yes, I really did. Your letter, I talked to Elizabeth about this letter, and it was really interesting. So John had written in and talked about he wanted to collect movies, but him and his wife, obviously they have very deeply held beliefs, and they don't like watching movies when the Lord's name is taken in vain. And should they not watch movies, and where are they from, and how should they deal with it? And I was like, at first I'm like, oh, come on. But then I'm like, if that's the way you want to lead your life, you should absolutely be able to do that. And why does somebody who has deeply held beliefs, why should they put up with those kinds of words? And I thought about it a lot. And I said, look, I don't think any creator, people talk that way in real life. And at first I was like, my first impulse was to think, well, get over it. But then I'm like, but that's not necessarily fair to them. And so I thought it was an interesting letter, and I did not ever stop thinking about it. And yeah, so that's a true story. I'm glad you wrote it. I'm mostly glad that you're still here watching the show. That's really great to hear, and I want to thank you for writing in. I may have read your letter, though. Maybe. I don't know. But I may have. This next letter is from Chris Hindley. Chris Hindley says, "Greetings, Rob. This is my first ever letter, and maybe not the last, especially with the way things are going globally at the moment. I've commented on your YouTube videos, not the Elizaviews and Robservations, or maybe it's on the Elizaviews and Robservations. I have the handle Chindley Muffin, which I should really change at some point. Is Chindley Muffin something I don't know about? I just like Chindley Muffin is something I would enjoy saying. Just, I love the way it rolls off the tongue. I first heard about you and your channel after I heard you on the Midnight's Edge channel contributing to a live stream on the subject of Star Trek. I think it was about Discovery and Brian Fuller's original pitch, and on World Class Bullshitter's High Council stream about Star Wars. Seeing your static headshot, the same headshot I use on all the thumbnails, looming menacingly out of the dark square above your name in the streams, it was unnerving to say the least. To this day, whenever I see your headshot image, it looks menacing and judgmental to me. I'm sorry, Master. Ha ha ha. It's right there. I'm reading it the way it's in the letter. It actually still gives me goosebumps, and not in a good way. As you can tell, my initial reaction to you wasn't the best, and I also thought you came across as a bit pretentious. Sorry, it's true. A bit above everyone else. Having watched your Robservations since then, although not all of them, I realized I was hasty with my first impressions of you, and whilst I don't always agree with your opinions, it's refreshing to have a different perspective on a movie, TV show, or genre in general. In these trying times, it's good to hear your thoughts, no matter how random they eventually become. That's very nice of you to say, sir. I realize that everyone has warped first impressions of others. For example, I have an accent that makes me sound like a cross between Henry Cavill and Patrick Stewart. Well, that sounds awesome to me, which made everyone think I was posh and from a family of wealth growing up. Nothing could be further from the truth. I come from a working class background, and my late father was a Yorkshireman. The Monty Python sketch about Yorkshiremen is spot on. Let me tell you a secret. Every American thinks anybody with a British accent is totally intelligent. Doesn't matter where you're from. Even if your words are full of Cockney slang, we're just going to assume you're way smarter than we are. Due to the lockdown and isolation imposed on us, I have a feeling that creative types will eventually start to realize that they have to keep creating things in order to keep the masses entertained, to quell the boredom. Maybe we will end up with more creative music, new novels being written, new comics, and of course video games. It reminds me of that recurring sketch in The Family Guy between Stewie Griffin and Brian, where Stewie keeps asking how Brian's novel is coming along. That cracks me up every time, and it's a reminder of the creativity within all of us. Anyway, I think I've rabbled on long enough. I will end up like the comedian Eddie Izzard, going off on a wild tangent about blue-collar workers on the Death Star. I love that skit from his stand-up, which I believe is still on YouTube, should anyone wish to watch it. Keep on keeping on, as they say. Keep calm and carry on, as the Brits say, right? I hope to see you ranting on about Discovery with the same level of frustration and fury as you did with Picard. I have to say, those rants really entertain me, and don't stop being entertaining. We all appreciate what you do. Best wishes to you and your kin. Chris Hindley. Excelsior. Well, Chris, I love hearing that. I guess I can come off as a bit of a pompous ass. Sometimes just an ass or a douchebag or any of the other myriad names people call me. People don't just say things like Chancellor of Cheerfulness. They say things like, who the fuck does that guy think he is? I get it. And there's anybody who talks on YouTube for 379 episodes has to have a certain modicum of douchebag in them. I'm sorry, but it's true. Except maybe Joe Rogan. I don't find Joe Rogan douchey. But I want to thank you for that letter. That was very nice of you to write in. And I'm glad that I was able to turn. I turned you, so now you're a valuable asset. As the Emperor would say, yes. Yes. So I appreciate that. This one comes from, hang on. It just went away. Let me get it again. Dun, dun, dun. Dean Mikitich. A letter from Dean Mikitich. A longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity. Here's a letter from Dean. By the way, it took me so long to get his name right, Mikitich. Now I know what it is. Hi, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity. Over the last year plus, we have witnessed to the lackluster in storytelling in our favorite franchises. From Star Wars to Terminator, Doctor Who to Star Trek. Some have claimed to have made a profit, Star Wars, and others have simply not even come close, like Charlie's Angels. But one thing is for sure. All of these franchises have been a complete and utter failure when it comes to storytelling. They have either retreaded stories that have been told before and everyone else can see where it's going, used story elements that have been told in their franchises before and much better, or the stories they are trying to tell with current-day PC views are a hot mess as they are throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, into the story and not paying off the threads that they have hanging, like we've just seen with Picard. The powers that be of these studios must see their moneymakers are turning off their audiences and fan bases and not bringing in new ones, therefore drying up a guaranteed income from fans. Star Wars had this with The Force Awakens and why it made $2 billion at the box office, but the following films made less money as fans walked away. In a business sense, that's not good, as they will be losing money on top of what they've lost already just by making the show. You said it yourself, Rob, the studios take out loans to get them made, so the studio is already starting at a loss. We are already witnessing the big two in the comic industry flushing their profits down the toilet with the recent announcement of Snowflake and Safe Space from Marvel and Gotham High from DC. Now, here's the thing. Well, actually, let me finish this. Can you say that these books will be a success and make a profit? On top of that, they will be losing money with comic stores unable to reopen after this crisis is over and are thinking of going digital first. I can already see people boarding their ships and heading off to the high seas for that. Nerdrotic has been covering that story a lot in depth. I hope Jacob Fudge and his store is not one of these casualties. Well, I can say this, if Paul from Long Beach is in the chat, he has been putting in a link. I mean, I don't know if YouTube frowns on this or not. I've been told they might. But Jacob Fudge is a longtime member of this community. His comic book store, Comic Relief Comics, I've anointed it. I've deemed it the first part of the Burnettwork that is not directly on YouTube. And Paul from Long Beach is running a campaign to have people help him out, which I think is great. But I hope his store is not one of these casualties either. Hollywood has stopped all production on films and the TV side until the current crisis is over, which could be for another 2 months minimum. This is giving them time to regroup and take a look at themselves and ask, is our current course in programming and film the right direction to keep going in and make us a profit? Do you think they, the powers that be, and not the showrunners, will be demanding rewrites of scripts to course correct their franchises while they have time to keep a hold of what fan bases they have left? How many people did not make it through the full season of Picard, or did but decided not to return for season 2, or will they let things carry on as they are? I know programs that have already finished filming and are having posts done to them are unlikely to change before they're due back on the air in a few months, but come January of next year when everything should be back to normal and the next season of shows will most likely be coming out, will we see a change in storytelling, or will these franchises continue to be flushed down the toilet until no one is interested in them? What do you think, Rob? Kind regards, Dean M. Well, one of the things I want to say about Gary, Nerdrotic, Gary Beekler used to own a comic book store. And he is very, like John Schnepp was very he's very passionate about the comic industry and comic book stores. He clearly loves those things. He has stated on his show that I've witnessed more than once how much he hopes to maybe one day have a comic book store again. So what's happening in the comic industry is near and dear to his heart, and it's probably really tearing him up. And I totally understand that. And, I think that the fact that he's out there, I mean, obviously he's got, 200,000 subscribers. The fact that he's addressing these issues is a good thing, and people are going to be aware of it, and I think that they should be. And I'm really hoping, ultimately, again, it's all about show business. So if a show's ratings are dropping, like obviously at the BBC, which has other problems as well, the ratings for Doctor Who have to be a concern. Fans, and as I've learned, anybody, whether it's the James Bond film franchise or whether it's comic books, if a comic company is putting out a shitty run of comic books and the book gets canceled or it comes back with a different creative team, I always dipped in to see, well, hey, there have been a lot of terrible runs in comic books, and then you get a new creative team, and then suddenly it's all reinvigorated. I mean, Jonathan Hickman's X-Men. I'd been so bored of the X-Men when I dipped into that or buy the omnibuses. But then, man, that Hickman run on X-Men, Powers of X and House of X and Powers of 10 or whatever, I was like, fuck, this is amazing. And suddenly my interest from X-Men went from here to 100 with 12 issues. So, again, the custodianship of a lot of these franchises, and I look at the Gundam franchise, for instance. I'm a Universal Century. In the world of Gundam, there is the main continuity, the Universal Century continuity that we've had series, whether it's Gundam, Zeta Gundam, all the different Gundam Unicorn that are in the Universal Century continuity. But then they have like Wing Gundam, which is a whole different continuity, or Turn A Gundam, which is kind of commenting. Look, Turn A Gundam. Turn A Gundam's right here. Look at this. This is my bootleg Turn A Gundam set that I got from Hong Kong, which actually is really cool. This is totally unrelated to anything else, but it is pretty cool. I mean, look at this. I mean, it's pretty dope. Maybe this isn't bootleg. I don't know, but it's a Hong Kong. I mean, I believe this has come out on Blu-ray. I just haven't picked it up. I don't know why this is randomly on my desk, but there it is. But anyway, some are better than others, and I think the problem with something like Picard is it's Star Trek, so there's many different levels of corporate interest in it. And I think one of the things that is really interesting about this is the Star Trek fan base. We like our Star Trek merch, whether it's keychains or bedspreads or model kits or action figures. I like ships and action figures. I love Star Trek models. The new Star Trek Picard doesn't have anything in it that I would want to buy. There wasn't one design. There wasn't, whether it was ships or not. I mean, the only thing that I even remotely liked was the Romulan bird of prey. We didn't see who was flying it. It turned out to be rather lame. So, the ancillary markets for Star Trek Picard, Midnight's Edge was reporting they couldn't get licensees on board. Well, no wonder. Like, if you're being shown pictures of this stuff, it's like, who wants any of that? There isn't even a hero shot of Riker's ship, so you don't know what does that ship really look like. It wasn't even very attractive, and that's a problem. But, we'll see. I think that everybody knows Doctor Who can be viable in the marketplace. And I don't think the reason Doctor Who is bad is because Jodie Whittaker is the first female Doctor Who. What I think is again, all of these shows and all of these franchises, it's all about the writing and the stories they're choosing to tell. That's what it is. And audiences aren't connecting. Like I use the one thing that I'm most intrigued about in terms of these stories, I really want to know what Ghostbusters is going to be, because to me, I'm always talking about how Ryan Coogler's Creed was the way to do a reboot of a franchise. It was a great way to reinvigorate the Rocky franchise after 40 years. I thought it was really terrific, where you get a passionate filmmaker like Ryan Coogler who pitched Stallone on his idea. It was his idea as a creative entity. He had an idea, pitched it, gave Stallone one of the best turns at Rocky ever, and maybe since the original, and created new characters that were in canon, canonical characters. I know people don't think of the Rocky franchise as they say the Star Trek franchise, but think about it as a cinematic universe. There is a Rocky cinematic universe. There's 6 Rocky films. There's now 2 Creed films. So you've got 8 films in the Rocky franchise, and that's pretty amazing. Actually, wait a minute. Yeah, Rocky's, that's right. 8 films in the Rocky franchise. So they're all canonical. And it was interesting. The only person, Ryan Coogler came in as the creative entity behind Creed, and Sylvester Stallone sort of ceded control to Ryan Coogler, and that was a ballsy move, man. I mean, for Stallone to have done that proved that Stallone's like, well, kid, I like this, and they worked it out. And look what happened. You ended up, Creed is a wonderful reinvention of a franchise done by somebody who's a passionate fan. And I would love to see more of that kind of thing happen. When Disney tapped James Gunn, who would have known he could have directed a $150 million franchise picture? But they did. I'll tell you, one of the smartest people in Hollywood is Kevin Feige, not just because of the MCU, but because of the talent he taps. Sometimes it works. Most time it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Maybe Alan Taylor didn't deliver on Thor: Dark World the way that they hoped, but still they make adjustments and come back. But they allowed James Gunn to bring his sensibility to that franchise, and look what happened. And I think it's interesting to me that why have they not cast that net and found people that are really passionate about the Star Trek franchise or passionate about Doctor Who or, I don't know. People, certainly you have to have people that have already delivered in that arena to give them that kind of responsibility, but you just never know. Let's see. Jason S. sends in a tip and says, our federal government's response was based in part on the false information coming out of China. That is true. That is true. As China claimed in January that there was no human-to-human transmission and that it was more like a SARS. Also, South Korea has more control of their people than the U.S. All of those are great points. The problem is we're supposed to anticipate this. When it comes to healthcare and health, we have enough infrastructure and we have enough science. We know what's up. That our pandemic response should have been in place. That kind of thing is just as important as our military, and we weren't ready. We had pandemic departments that were dismantled and people were put into other places. A lot of the blame when President Trump was elected, remember, he never even staffed all of the government positions that were supposed to be staffed when he came on board. He never did. And our State Department is not as effective as it used to be. I think it was a cumulative effect. But if there's one thing that we should know as a country, and we did know because we've been warned, we know our military has already gamed out the results of global warming. They have gamed out the results of pandemics. I know people that have gamed these things out for think tanks. We know these things. It's just that nobody wants to spend the money in preparedness because people are like, what do we need that for? Why do we need to spend the money? Well, we need to spend the money for this very reason. And the health care of our population as well. Anyway, Sky Amazing Guy sends in a super chat and says, Rob, my man, I love the show. How did you and Schnepp meet? I don't remember. Love that guy. There is a circle of people. There's a circle of people in LA that work in I would call it the genre space. And those people, there's a wide variety of people in that space. And a lot of them know each other. When you go to parties, like if I would go to a party at my friend Charlie Lazarica's house, his house parties were pretty epic because of all of the kinds of people that you would meet. You never knew. You never knew who you were going to meet at those parties, but people that are very successful. And I would say it's a cadre of people that inhabit the genre world. If you're making horror and science fiction, but I would say horror really pretty much the horror community is pretty active in terms of fandom. The horror community also likes to go out and say, like I do, drink. So, you have people that'll make time and you'll go to a place and you'll all hang out and somebody will know. Like for the longest time, there was a place called Timmy Nolan's in Toluca Lake. And every Thursday night, people would congregate and meet at Timmy Nolan's. And they were all pretty much in that LA horror world at various levels. And anybody was welcome. And you'd come and hang out, and you'd drink at Timmy Nolan's until 2 a.m. and then Friday morning. And then you'd all go next door to Bob's Big Boy and sometimes stay there till 5 a.m. And so there is that kind of a community. But when you start going to, and it's not so much now because people get older, but in the 90s, it was more, the 90s and the aughts, because there's so many different events and you end up meeting people. And I think I knew Schnepp a little bit, like we knew each other, but then I dated a girl that for a number of years that knew a lot of those people, including Schnepp, and knew him better. So I started to see him more and more, and I got to be friendly with him. And we're talking like 2006, 2007, and 2008, and that's when I really started to get to know him, more than just like, hey man, how's it going? And we'd talk about things or whatever, but then we became friendly. And that's how I really started to get to know him. Like Schnepp once called me up, and he had made a zombie Muppet short called They Coming. And he asked me if there's people I could show it to, and I actually got it played at the Masquerade at San Diego Comic-Con. Stuff like that. And that's what people do. LA is a great place for that. So it's pretty cool. So that's how I knew Schnepp. But I don't remember exactly how I met him. Hassan sends in a tip and says, hello, Robert. You're the nicest man on the internet. Well, I don't know about that. How are we supposed to bully you now that you've seen Sound of Music? Is there another masterpiece you haven't seen? I'm sure there is, but I don't necessarily have an answer for it now. I got to come up with one. But Sound of Music was pretty damn egregious. Best Picture. I'd never seen it. And Robert Wise, a favorite filmmaker of mine. It's interesting because I was watching the movie and something did strike me about. Well, I'll say it tonight, but it came out a year after Mary Poppins, and I found there was a certain similarity, and I want to find out before I go on the show tonight how Julie Andrews was cast in that role, which I don't really know. But thank you for the kind words, sir. I appreciate it. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to. Well, first of all, you know what? There's something I forgot I was even going to do this. I forgot I was going to do this, but I'll show you now. So one of the things that's kind of fun about being in quarantine or staying at home is, especially if you're an imagination connoisseur, is just like projects and things that you can do. And back in 2008, I for whatever reason, I was going through a nostalgia kick, and I used to be, like, in elementary school, president of my model rocket club. And I always loved model rockets, and I wanted to get one of my favorite model rockets, which was an Estes Interceptor from the 70s. It was the coolest rocket, and I found out that Estes made a larger version of that. It was the same thing, but it was bigger. It flew on bigger engines, which I also didn't know existed. And then I found out there were companies like Semrock or Sirius Modeling or Q Modeling or Penrose Industries and all that. I found that there's all these cool, like, model rockets had gone more upscale, bigger, faster. I mean, people are making model rockets that go 10,000 feet in the air, and you have to have FAA waivers and stuff. So one of the things I started buying upscale versions of the old Estes model rockets, and Estes themselves made the Interceptor, which I think I've shown on the show before, but it's hanging from the ceiling in the Robservatory. But I started this. So I bought these rockets back in 2008, but I didn't make them. And like 2 or 3 years ago, when Elizabeth lived in a different place before we moved in together, I was telling her about this. For whatever reason, I brought over a bunch of these unbuilt models, and I turned her dining room table into a rocket factory, and I would hang out at her house and just build rockets. Well, I finished some of them, but some I didn't finish. So I just pulled this out, which is this is one I didn't finish. This is an upscale version of the Starship Vega. That it was an old rocket from 1979, but Q Modeling back in 2008 were doing upscale versions, much bigger versions of these rockets. So I had built this, and this is just cardboard and balsa wood, just like model rockets are. But so I had put it together, and what I was doing, I primed them and sand them, and like I wanted to make them. So here, for instance, I've got wood filler, and I hadn't quite finished yet, but like you see how the wood filler, when you sand it down, you make this look like it's all one piece. And so I never quite finished this to the point where I wanted to finish painting it. But I just, since moving things around in the Robservatory, I'm going to finish this rocket. I'm going to hang it up above my head. Now, I don't know if I'm going to fly it. It's hard to fly model rockets in the LA city limit. But it's just one other thing. In addition to delivering all the Hills Run Red behind the scenes, we've got like 4 hours of special features for the behind the scenes on the Hills Run Red Blu-ray that comes out on January 16th. That's, of course, the movie I produced that Dave Parker directed, and he and I have been creating all these special features. So in addition to doing these shows, I'm like, yeah, man, I'm going to finish my Starship Vega like in the next week. I'm going to finish use the wood filler and the painting, and because I've still got all the paints I bought for like 2 years ago, which I never used. And I don't use an airbrush on these. I rattle can it up. But so I just... Every other imagination connoisseur, are you guys working on projects? What will those be? And now I can show you. So here's the Starship Vega as it exists now. And as you can see how this is like wood filler. Obviously I slopped it on, and it's not painted, but it'll eventually look like this. And there's even there's springs, like these are spring loaded so it can land on those things. But you'll see it. So now you're invested. People are going to be like, "Hey, how's the finishing of the Starship Vega coming?" And I will get it painted and finished. Anyway, what are you guys doing? Do you have any projects? Show them to me. Send them to me at the Burnettwork. Put them on the Imagination Connoisseur Gallery and that kind of thing. I'm going to bring this episode of Robservations, show about something, Robservations episode number. Let me take off my glasses. Robservations episode number 379 is coming to an end. And hey, I want to remind everybody that tonight at 8 o'clock on the Burnettwork, 8 o'clock Pacific, not Standard Time, Pacific Daylight Time, we will be having Elizaviews episode number 9, and I'll be discussing Sound of Music, which I watched for the very first time last night, which is unbelievable, but true. So join Elizabeth Gwendolyn Bell and myself for Elizaviews, Whining About Movies, episode 9, covering the sound of music. We're going to share a bottle of wine, talk about the sound of music, and you can join us. And with that, I want to say, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel generously, whether it's tips, whether it's super chats, whether it's letters. If I haven't gotten through letters yet, I've got many more that I'm still getting through. So if I haven't read your letter, it's not because I don't like you. But I do get a lot. And I'll flat out admit, I don't read every letter. I get so many letters, I would get too far behind. But that doesn't mean I don't like your letter, and we're way behind getting them up on the website. But if you don't see your letter read, it's a good bet it's on the website, so check it out. Go to theburnettwork.net and check it out. And I want to thank my moderating staff. First of all, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa. I want to thank him for maintaining the website and also getting me letters. I want to thank my other moderators, starting with Detective Jim Boyers, of course, Greg Smith, Lewis Yu, and Jordy Lyons for being a great moderating staff and making sure that you guys, as imagination connoisseurs, are having a good time for the most part. And yeah, and I will be back. I'm not on the John Campea show tomorrow, but I will be back on my own show, of course, probably back here at 1 o'clock. And yeah, maybe I'll have to do some sanding of the Starship Vega and get it finished. Now I feel obligated because now you know. Now I've told you. Now you can give me hell. But ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our broadcast for Robservations episode number 379. Thanks again. And remember, as everything crazy is going on, that doesn't mean you still can't have a better day. So I will wish you just that very thing. As always, have a better day.